Support for this episode is provided by Rockler Woodworking and Hardware. Create with confidence. And Garnica Plywood. Challenge the ordinary with Garnica Plywood. Hey everyone, and thanks for tuning in. This week I'm building 2 chairs from 1 sheet of plywood. If you want to build these chairs, you can find free plans at my website along with dozens of other free plans to all my woodworking projects. Just go to johnpeters.com and click on design plans. Let's get to work. I'll get started by ripping the parts to width. I make the first rip a little heavy, and when the pieces are smaller and easier to handle, I'll cut them to the exact size, taking a little bit off each side. Then I'll use the miter saw to cut the parts to a rough length, and you can see that the material is a little wider than what my saw will cut, so I make the first cut, flip the board over, and then finish the cut. I'm using the crosscut sled on the table saw to cut the parts to their finished length. And it's a good idea to use a little painter's tape before making the cut, and this will help to reduce tear out on the crosscut. The first cut is the 90-degree angle, and I'll make this cut on all the parts. Then I'll change the angle of the blade to 5 degrees, use a stop block, and cut the parts to their exact length. For the support piece under the seat, I'll make a pattern, and I'll use this pattern for both chairs. I'll first trace a 5-degree angle on the pattern, make that cut using the miter saw, and then use a thin piece of wood to trace the radius. And next I'll use the bandsaw to cut along the line. Now I can trace the pattern onto the workpiece and cut that out on the bandsaw. I'll make this cut just a little bit heavy off the line. Now I've got a flush cut bit in the router. The ball bearing will run along the pattern, making the exact same support piece for both chairs. I've got all of the parts to the chair cut, and I'm almost ready to assemble, but there's one more thing I need to do, and that is to add a 1/4 inch deep by 3/4 inch wide dado to the back of the chair to accept the seat. I'm holding the bottom of the chair support flush with the bottom of the chair back and tracing a line. Then I'll do the same thing on this side of the chair. Next I'll clamp my straight edge jig for my router at those lines. I've got a 3/4 inch straight bit in the router. I've set the depth to a 1/2 inch, taking into account the 1/4 inch plywood on the jig, and now I'm ready to cut the dado. I'm building the chair using screws. It's kind of a simple build, but I still want it to look nice and have a nice symmetry. So I'm measuring and marking at 1.5 inches and 6 inches, pulling from each side of the chair, and then I'll pre-drill and countersink holes for screws. To assemble the chair, first I'll attach the chair seat to the chair back. One of the many things I like about working with Garnica Plywood is their 3/4 inch plywood measures 3/4 of an inch. So this 3/4 inch dado fits perfect. The second step is to attach the chair brace. I'm using the bandy clamps by Rockler to hold the brace in the center of the chair and attaching the brace with 2 screws through the seat and 2 screws through the back. The next step is to attach the chair front with 4 screws through the seat. This is a neat little woodworking trick that anyone can do. I learned it years ago, using your fingernail as a guide to draw a straight line. And it's one of those things, the more you do it, the better you get. The last step is to attach the chair bottom. Here I find the location to pre-drill and countersink holes by tracing a line from the center of the chair back. Then I'll use a framing square to continue that line across. I'm filling the holes with walnut plugs, and this is a plug cutting drill bit, and you can find these at Rockler. I'll have a link in the description. Because the holes are not very deep and I don't want to wait for wood glue to dry, I'm attaching the plugs with 5-minute epoxy. A few minutes later, I can trim the plugs with a router. You can also use a saw to trim the plugs, but I find a router to be faster and less likely to damage the plywood veneer. I'm using a dovetail bit in the router simply because I had one, but you could also use a straight bit. The next step is sanding, and I used 80 grit sandpaper and a sanding block to get the plugs flush. And then I sanded the chair with 120 grit sandpaper. And here you want to be careful to take the sharpness off of the edge, but not round the edge over. Finally, I'm ready for a finish, and for this project I'm using water-based polyurethane. I often use water-based polyurethanes for light color woods like birch plywood, or in this case, I'm building this chair out of maple plywood. I decided to paint the inside of the chair white, so I've masked everything out, and now I'm using a latex acrylic paint, 2 coats, and then I'll clear over that with the water-based polyurethane. Okay, well, I'm pretty happy with this design. If I were to make any changes to it, I would probably add 2 or 3 inches to the back of the chair, and there would be enough material in the full sheet of plywood to do that. I also may end up adding a white cushion to the back, and maybe even a white cushion to the seat, and I think that would go well with the white on the inside of the chair. I did post a picture of the scale model for this project on my Instagram. If you're not following me on Instagram, my Instagram's kind of a behind-the-scenes look at what's going on with projects, so I hope you'll check that out. I'll have a link in the description. And there are free plans for this chair on my website, along with dozens of other free plans to all my woodworking projects, so I hope you'll check out johnpeters.com. As always, thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time. To keep up with current projects, follow me on Instagram and Facebook. For vlog-style Q&As and shop news, check out my second channel. I'll have links in the description.